Hi, and welcome to the actual first video in our PowerShell Universal series. Technically, this is the second video, but this is the first video where we're actually going to be doing work inside PowerShell Universal. So if you don't know what PowerShell Universal is, it is basically an application or a service that you can install that really lets you create a PowerShell backend or run PowerShell scripts and create user interfaces using PowerShell. So it's a very big tool. If you don't know how to install it, I do have a video already on how to install it on my channel. I'll put the link below in the description so you guys can follow that. So this way you guys can follow along with this video. So the first thing we're going to be looking at with PowerShell Universal is actually creating API or creating endpoints or routes. So we're going to go through a few examples. So I actually have two examples today, which are very basic routes, and then we're going to get into some more complicated examples in later videos. And just as a side note, this video is not sponsored at all by Ironman Software or which is the team behind PowerShell Universal. This is just completely my own on just really enjoying using PowerShell Universal over the last couple weeks. And learning it and just wanting to actually show the world what you can actually create with PowerShell Universal, since a lot of people really liked the REST-PS videos on the channel for creating APIs using PowerShell. This I find is a lot more user-friendly to use, a lot more powerful, and just has a very nice interface. So it's very easy to grasp, and should be quite fun. And we actually have a project to do at the end of this series. We're going to be making some tools, creating some user interfaces with the API routes that we created. So actually, before we go any further, let's actually go ahead and let's get started here. So we are now logged into our session here. So just to show you guys how to actually access your PowerShell Universal environment is if you have it running, you're just going to come here on your server or your actual machine, your Windows machine. You're just going to go to localhost port 5000. It's going to bring you to a login page, and you're just going to log in here. And then you are going to be able to actually perform. So we are using version 4.2.10. I believe any version of 4.2 should probably be pretty usable for these videos. As I can already tell, there's already a new version available of 4.2.11 since the last recording of our video where we installed it, and it hasn't even been that long. So this is something that is constantly updated, which is really nice as well. But let's go ahead and let's create our first route here. So we have the menu on the left-hand side where we have APIs, and we're just going to click on endpoints here. And here is going to be our dashboard where we're going to be spending a lot of time. So we actually want to go ahead and we're going to create a new endpoint. And in here, what I like to actually do is just actually do a, we're going to go ahead and create a endpoint to list all of our users in Active Directory, because that's what our tool at the end is going to really be. It's going to be an Active Directory tool. So we're going to do a lot of practice with Active Directory here and creating endpoints. So we're just going to do users here, and we're going to do a slash, and we're going to just do list. We're going to do list users here. All right, and we're going to keep the method to get here. We're just going to click on OK. Now this is going to create us a little folder, and it's going to create us a little route. So that's actually perfect here. So what we can actually do to just test it out real quick is if we click on edit details here, all I typically like to just make sure that everything is working is if we do a get computer info here, we can go ahead, we can save this. So the save button is just this little floppy drive here, if you've been around long enough, but most of the save icons are just little floppies. That's what those are called. And we are going to go ahead and we can actually test out our route here by just on the output. There's a little play button here. We can click on that, and that will actually give us our output, and we see that it actually does work. And we see here right above, it actually gives us what our PowerShell command is to actually call this. So if we actually just hit this little copy button here, we can actually come over here into our Visual Studio, and we can do an invoke REST method with our route, which is users/list users with the method of get. We can go ahead and we can actually run that. Now you're going to see we get this response code of 401 unauthorized. Now, this is because we actually did not take out the authentication on our route. So what we can actually do is go back to our route here, click on users, and we can actually edit properties right here with the little gear icon, take off this authentication. Now you can leave this authentication on. You'll just have to authenticate through the system. We might do some videos later on that. Now, one thing to note about the authentication piece is you won't get full authentication with the free version. That is something only available on the paid version here. So that's really the only thing we're going to change. You can add a description here, so we can actually just say list all users in Active Directory. And then you can go ahead and you can link the documentation to it, but we don't need to do that. You can add tags. You can even set up the environment that you want it to run in, if you want it to run in PowerShell 7 or PowerShell 5.1. Do note that you will get this PowerShell 7 option even if you don't have PowerShell 7 installed, and that will cause you a little bit of errors in the system. You just have to install PowerShell 7 afterwards, restart the service, and you'll be good to go. I actually just like to leave it blank and just leave it by default, or I usually set it up to PowerShell 7. I will rarely these days select PowerShell 5.1, but we're just going to select PowerShell 7 for us today. And I think, yeah, perfect. So everything looks good there. So now if we actually go back and we hit run, we will see that we actually get our response back with all the computer info. So everything is actually working correctly here. We have a basic route that we did for list users. Now, of course, this doesn't actually list the users. It is getting us the computer info. So let's actually go ahead and modify this route to actually do what it's supposed to do. So we're just going to take this out here. And one of the neat things with this editor here is we can actually go full screen, and it does actually make it quite a lot easier to write your code here. The only thing is you can zoom in just like this. So we're going to be zooming in here just so you guys can actually see what I'm typing. Otherwise, it would be quite hard for you guys to actually see what I'm doing here. So what we actually want to do is create a variable. We're going to call it users here, and we're going to make that equal to get-AD-user. Now you will have to make sure if you are just installing PowerShell Universal on your system, you're going to want to make sure if you're following this video to exactly a T, you're going to want to make sure you have the Active Directory module actually installed. This is actually installed on a server, and I'll show you guys a little bit later on how we can actually run the code from another computer as well. So we have this users variable. We're going to have a get-AD-user. We're going to do a filter star here. We're also going to do a properties star. We want to grab all the properties. Now, in this case, you might not want to do properties star, especially if you have a large environment. As I've said in other videos, you typically only want to get the properties you really, really want. It will definitely speed things up, but in our case, our environment is fairly small, so it's not going to be that bad. And we're going to put in our server here. And then what I always like to do when I'm creating routes is always create a object, which is going to be a result object. And that is what I'm going to respond back with. So we're going to create it as an empty array here. Since we are listing users, we know we're going to have multiple users. So I'm going to create a little array here. Now, once again, we can actually just cast this to a system dot collections dot array list. And that way, if our array does get a lot bigger, at least it's not going to be the end of the world. It's going to be easily expandable. And what we're going to want to do is we're just going to want to do entry. So first, we're going to want to do a for each. So we're going to want to loop through each user here. So each user in users. And inside the curly bracket, we're going to want to create another, and this is going to be an actual object here. We're going to create an entry object, and we're going to make this a PS custom object. Now I'm going to do this a little bit differently than what I normally do. Normally I create the object and then do add member. Since this is an API route, I like to keep the code kind of simplified. So we're just going to do an @ symbol and then the open and closing brackets. And we're going to create our object this way here. So we're going to do name is going to be equal to user.name. And we're going to do username is equal to user.sam account name. And we're just going to start off with these two first. And then all we need to do afterwards is just a result.add user. And all I like to do before this, just to make sure that there's no output here, we're just going to add the void keyword in front of it there. And then all we need to do is do a return result. There we go. And we supposedly have a syntax error. Oh, yeah, we don't need the $sign in front of the for each there. And perfect. So that is all written out now. So we can go ahead and we can save this. Now we can go ahead and test it out, make sure that it actually gives us back. So it is giving us an error returned by endpoint here. Let's go ahead. Let's just make sure that everything looks okay. So let's just go ahead and let's save. Make sure that I actually had hit save. Yeah, it's still giving us an error. So what I like to do is I like to just go back in here, make sure that everything is looking okay. What I'm actually going to do is just remove. What I'm going to actually do is just copy paste this. So this is what I also like to do to test things out real quick. Let me just reopen up this here and minimize this and go inside our Visual Studio code here and paste this code and go ahead and just run this. And it did actually work properly. So everything there should be good. Make sure that there's no weird output at the beginning. Okay, and that's actually what we did wrong. So one of the key things is you're going to notice with the PowerShell Universal, if you're actually returning the user object, that's where you're going to start getting errors. We need to do add entry, and that should actually work here. And it's going to be a $sign entry. And we're going to hit save. And let's go ahead, let's hit run here. And this should actually is our output here. And as we can see, the code, we have our array list. We're just adding our entry. We're adding our name and our username, and we're returning the result, which is going to be a list of all of our users. So if we actually go ahead and copy this URL here, bring it into our Visual Studio Code, go ahead and run this, we can actually see those are all of our users in our Active Directory right now with just the name and the username. So what we can actually do is actually come back over here and we can start adding more properties here. So what I like to do is just add a few at first, make sure that you can get it working, and then we can add some more. So we're going to add the user principal name, employee ID, and we're going to make that equal to user.employee ID. And we're going to add the title as well. And let's go ahead and let's add the enabled, user.enabled. And then the only other thing that I really want to do is get if the password is expired, if the user is locked out, and then the last bad password attempt. So let's go ahead and let's just do that. So password expired is equal to user.password expired. Locked out is going to be equal to user.lockedout. And then last bad password attempt is going to be equal to user.last bad password attempt. So now if we actually go ahead, we shrink this back down, we hit save, and we go ahead, we return back to our Visual Studio. We actually pull this back and we actually get all that information back for our users. So very, very neat things. We could easily add things or remove things at our leisure in this route. And then wherever we call that API, we're going to get the updated information. Now, all I'm actually going to go ahead and do here is create a little properties variable here. And we're just going to do the @ symbol. And all we're going to do is name. So let's do name, SAM account name, user principal name, employee ID. Oops, we need to put that in quotes. Employee ID, title, enabled. We also got the password expired, locked out, and then the last bad password attempt here. And then all we're going to do is instead of a properties star, we're just going to put that in here, and that will just speed up our request to the server. And now if we hit next, it goes quite a bit faster. It's not super noticeable once again, because we have such a small Active Directory, but in a large Active Directory environment, you will definitely notice that difference. So that is our first route that we've been able to create here. Now, let's say you have this on your server. You want to actually publish this to people at your work or other people in your home lab environment or wherever it is. Now, this is actually on a server. What we can actually do is come onto a client machine here, which we have our client machine right here. Oops, right here. We can open up a Visual Studio code here, and I can actually invoke the same users and list users here. We can have a get. Now, if I actually try to do this right now, we will actually see it will spin for a long time and will actually fail. So what we can do is we're just going to actually go ahead and let it fail here. It should just take a few more seconds. Now, this is actually very, very important, especially if you wanted to actually test this in your home lab and have it accessible from client machines or at your work, because it won't actually work by default. What we're actually have to do is on your server where you're hosting your PowerShell Universal is go ahead and type in wf.msc, and that will actually open up your firewall rules here. So I actually have it open right here. And we're going to want to create a new inbound rule. And we're going to do it on the specific port here. We're going to click on next. We're going to specify the port 5000. We're going to allow the connection. Now, this is where you would typically definitely pick out the appropriate ones for your environment. For us, since again, it's just a test environment, we're just going to let it at the defaults here. We're just going to allow it for everything. And all I like to do is just add the name here of PS Universal. And we're going to add that in there. And now if we actually come back to our client machine, it works instantly right away. It is very, very quick. So if for some reason you get any type of slowness, it's probably going to fail. If you're trying it from a client machine to your server right away, just go on the server where it is hosted and add the firewall rule, and it should work no problem. So let's go ahead, let's go back onto our server, and let's go ahead and create another route here. So this is going to be another basic route, but we're going to have a variable inside of our route here. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to create a new endpoint. We're going to once again create it in users, and we're going to do a get user, and we're going to do a slash here. Now this part is the important part. We're going to do a colon username. And we're going to go ahead. We're going to keep that as a get. And we're going to click OK. Now, as we know, we need to go right into the properties right away, disable the authentication, and then the environment, we want to make it sure that it's PowerShell 7. And we can go ahead and we can edit the details. Now, one thing you're going to notice here is we actually have a box called variables where we actually have the ability to enter a variable here. This is going to be really important because this is what the people are going to pass in to the route to be able to get a specific user. So let's go ahead and let's just create our code for getting the user, and then we'll go ahead and show how that actually works here. So what we actually want to do is we can actually pretty much copy the exact same thing as our other one here. So let's go ahead. We're going to leave. We're going to go ahead and we are going to go here. We're going to grab this entire code here of list users. We're going to go into the get user. We're going to edit the properties here. We're going to paste that in here. We're just going to make it a little bit bigger. We're going to make a few little key changes. So instead of a filter star, what we're going to have is we're going to have the identity, and we're going to put that to $username. Now you're going to be wondering, where is this $username? We haven't actually set up a $username anywhere. That is where that colon username is going to come in handy. So that is all fine here. So, and then the only thing that we need to actually do is actually change this for each loop. So you're going to have just the result, and the result is going to equal your PS custom object. And then we're going to go ahead and we are just going to return the result. It's a lot easier to copy paste all of those things. There's no point in really rewriting it out twice. So there it is. There's all the info. And we're just going to hit save here. Go back. So now if we go ahead and we hit run, we're going to get error returned by endpoint. And that's actually normal because we haven't entered a username in here. So we can actually do test employee 3. That is a user that I actually have here. And we hit run. There is our information. So now if we do, we can actually do employee 1. And there it is, but it's saying that everything is null. So let's go ahead and let's see what could be going on here. So we have the, and this is going to be just user. You guys probably noticed that before I did here. That's the only thing with copy pasting is sometimes you might forget to change a few key things here. So we have our employee 1. Let's do test employee 3 here. Hit run. There it is. There's the name, username, user principal name, and we're getting all the information back that actually should come back. So now, once again, we can actually just copy this route over here, and we can paste it in here, and there it is. It's our test employee 3 that we're looking for. If we go ahead and we hit run, we get all that information. So now let's look. We have employee 2 here, so we can actually do employee 2. If we wanted to get that one, we can just change the route to employee 2, and you can go ahead and see that that works. So then what you'd be able to do is if you had just a console application that was running off of this URL, is you'd be able to have something like this where you have a $username, and you can have a username equals read host, and then prompt, we're just going to say enter a username. And if we go ahead and we just run this here, we can say, let's look for employee 1. And then there it is. So it's actually just running off purely off of that API. So we're not actually writing any of the Active Directory PowerShell in here. We don't even need to have the PowerShell module on this client PC. It is doing it all through the API, which is super, super cool. Oh, this is actually running on the actual computer, so it would need the actual module. But we can say test employee 3, and there it is. So now if we actually did the same thing, we go onto our client PC here, we can actually just say users and then get user and then say test employee 3 here. We can go ahead, we can invoke that, and there it is. So this is actually completely on a different computer. We can still access those API routes. There is on the actual local machine. We can query our API routes to make sure that they work. And these are just very, very simple get method routes for now. We are going to be seeing how to use bodies and seeing other types of routes. Really changing from a get to a post doesn't change how you would actually create these at all. So that is the useful thing. We're going to be looking at a little bit more complicated routes in the next video with a body object there. So you can pass in a body, of course, to these routes and be able to treat it. But these are just simple query string routes that we've created today. And later on in this series, we're going to be looking at creating user interfaces, which is going to be actually creating GUI or like web-based GUI applications using only PowerShell. So those will get very, very interesting. If you guys want to see anything specific with PowerShell Universal, please let me know in the comment section down below. And also, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Also, be sure to hit that notification bell to be notified when that next video comes out. And I will see you guys on the next video.